The stark white of the text message seared against the dark screen of Liam's phone, a digital brand on his soul. "You're not family anymore." It read, a blunt, unceremonious declaration from his father, Richard. No explanation, no preamble, just an abrupt, clinical severing. It was a guillotine of words, dropping silently in the quiet hum of his apartment, yet echoing with the force of 1,000 shouted arguments. Liam, at 28, was a software engineer, a man of logic and algorithms, a quiet observer in a family of boisterous personalities. He'd always been the responsible one, the reliable rock, often overlooked, a steady, unyielding presence overshadowed by the vibrant, demanding chaos of his sister Chloe. His emotional distance, a carefully constructed fortress built over years of subtle manipulation and neglect, now served as an impenetrable shield. He felt no immediate surge of anger, no wave of sadness. Only a cold, calculating calm settled over him, a chilling premonition that had finally materialized. This text, he realized, was the culmination of years of feeling like an outsider, a tolerated presence rather than a cherished member. It was the final undeniable proof that their familial bond, if it ever truly existed, was conditional, transactional, and now irrevocably broken. His grandmother, bless her kind, knowing heart, had seen it. Her passing just 6 months prior had left a gaping void, but also a legacy: the family trust. It was a substantial inheritance, meant to be equally divided between Liam and Chloe when they reached a certain age, or under specific, carefully outlined conditions. Now, with his grandmother gone, it seemed to have fallen solely under the control of his parents, Richard and Eleanor. Without a moment's hesitation, without a single tremor in his hand, Liam opened his banking app. His fingers moved with an almost serene precision, navigating through the familiar interface, locating the trust account. He initiated the transfer, moving the entire sum, every last cent, into his personal savings. The screen glowed with the confirmation message. He clicked confirm. A profound, almost spiritual quiet settled over him, a sense of rightness that transcended the enormity of his action. It wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was a reclamation, a quiet, definitive act of self-preservation. He had been expecting something like this, a final push, a dismissal, and he had prepared. The calm before the storm, he thought, staring at the empty trust balance, a ghost of what once was. 3 hours later, the storm broke. Chloe's name flashed across his screen. Then again and again, a relentless assault of missed calls. Then the texts began, a furious torrent of capital letters and exclamation points. "What did you do? You stole everything. I'm going to kill you." Her accusations were baseless, wild, driven by pure, unadulterated panic and self-interest. She hadn't even checked the trust account yet, he knew. She was reacting to something his parents had told her, a panicked whisper that the well had run dry. Liam let the phone buzz, ignored the digital screams. His silence, he knew, would only fuel her fury, turning her into a raging inferno. His parents, Richard and Eleanor, were next. Their initial calls were attempts to manage Chloe, to feign concern, to exert their usual subtle control. "Liam, what's going on with your sister? She's hysterical." Then thinly veiled threats. "This isn't like you. You need to calm her down, or there will be consequences." They were still unaware of the true extent of his actions, still believing they held all the cards. Liam ignored them too. He watched as the family's carefully constructed public image, a shimmering facade of wealth and respectability, began to crack. Chloe, true to form, took to social media. Her posts were vague at first, angry pronouncements about betrayal and unforgivable acts without naming him directly. But the subtext was clear, and their social circle, a gossipy, insular world, began to raise eyebrows. The whispers started, then the murmurs, then the outright questions. He remembered a childhood of constant comparisons, always falling short. In elementary school, he'd won the regional science fair, a meticulously built volcano that actually erupted. His parents had offered a perfunctory good job, then immediately pivoted to Chloe's latest dance recital, where she'd stumbled but still managed to charm the audience with her dramatic recovery. His academic achievements were consistently downplayed, celebrated with a dismissive pat on the head, while Chloe's superficial accomplishments, her fleeting popularity, or even her manufactured dramatics, garnered lavish praise and attention. The financial discrepancies were even more glaring. When Liam needed a new laptop for college, he had to present a detailed budget, justify every expense, and still received only half the amount requested, forcing him to work extra shifts. Months later, Chloe, after a particularly bad breakup, was gifted a brand new car. No questions asked, no budget required. There were countless instances where she was given significant financial advantages, bailouts from credit card debt, lavish shopping sprees, while his own, more modest requests were met with scrutiny, denial, or a lecture on fiscal responsibility. He was the family's emergency fund, the one they turned to when their own impulsive spending caught up to them, only to be forgotten once the crisis passed. The emotional neglect was perhaps the deepest wound. He remembered a time in middle school, after a particularly brutal bullying incident, he'd sought comfort from his mother. She'd patted his shoulder, told him to be strong, and then quickly changed the subject to Chloe's upcoming cheerleading tryouts. He was always told to toughen up, to handle things on his own, while Chloe received lavish attention and endless sympathy for even the smallest setbacks. He learned early on that his pain was inconvenient, his needs secondary. Only his grandmother, bless her soul, had truly seen him. She was the one consistent source of unconditional love and validation. She'd spend hours with him, listening to his ideas about coding, encouraging his quiet passions. She understood his reserved nature, his need for intellectual stimulation over social performance. On her deathbed, her voice frail but firm, she had reiterated her wishes for the trust. "It's for both of you, Liam," she'd whispered, her hand clutching his. "Equally. And I want you to make sure it's used for good, for what truly matters." She had looked at him with a knowing gaze, a silent acknowledgement of the family dynamics, and a subtle plea for him to protect her legacy. Richard and Eleanor's realization was slow, then sudden, like a dam breaking. Their initial disbelief morphed into growing panic as they tried to access the trust themselves and found it utterly, irrevocably empty. Their calls to Liam became more desperate, then outright threatening. "You've made a terrible mistake, Liam. This is illegal," his father bellowed in a voicemail, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and fear. "You will put that money back, or we will disown you." The irony was not lost on Liam. They had already disowned him. The text message was proof. Just as the pressure from his parents reached a fever pitch, a new number appeared on his screen. It was Aunt Beatrice, his grandmother's younger sister. Beatrice was a quiet woman, a retired librarian, who had always lived somewhat detached from the main family drama, observing from a distance with a keen, intelligent eye. Liam braced himself for another accusation, another lecture on family loyalty. But her voice when he answered was calm, almost soothing. "Liam," she said, her tone devoid of judgment. "I heard things. Are you all right?" Liam hesitated. "I'm fine, Aunt Beatrice." "Good," she replied, a hint of steel in her voice. "Because I think it's about time someone stood up to them. Your grandmother, she always worried about them. Richard and Eleanor. They've always had a way of acquiring things. And not always honestly." Liam's breath hitched. "What do you mean?" "Before the trust was formally established," Beatrice continued, her voice dropping slightly, "your grandmother had other assets. Significant ones. She was not as sharp in her later years as she once was. And they were very, very persuasive." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "I have some old papers. Letters. Financial statements. Things your grandmother kept even when she was confused. She had a habit of documenting everything. Bless her meticulous heart. She used to send me copies of things, just in case, she'd say." Liam's mind raced. This wasn't just about the trust. This was deeper. This was about a pattern, a history of deceit that stretched back further than he'd imagined. Aunt Beatrice wasn't accusing him. She was offering support, a lifeline, a crucial piece of the puzzle he hadn't known existed. "They tried to change the trust, didn't they?" Liam asked, a cold certainty settling in his stomach. "They tried many things, dear," Beatrice confirmed. "After your grandmother passed, they were very eager to interpret her wishes. But your grandmother was clear. To me and in her documents. Very clear. The trust was for you and Chloe equally. and she had specific instructions about how it was to be managed and who was to benefit. They tried to circumvent that to gain more control to limit your access. They even tried to write you out entirely at one point, or at least make it so difficult for you to access you'd give up. The pieces clicked into place. His father's text. "You're not family anymore." It wasn't a reaction to his trust transfer. It was a preemptive strike. They had discovered his hidden knowledge, perhaps through a subtle data breach on their part, a misstep he had exploited without them knowing. They were trying to disinherit him, to cut him off before he could expose them. His trust transfer wasn't the cause of their anger. It was a reactive strike, perfectly timed, based on their initial aggression. He had beaten them to the punch. "Aunt Beatrice," Liam said, his voice steady, a new resolve hardening his tone. "I think we need to talk. In person." "I thought you might," she replied, a faint, knowing smile in her voice. "I'll bring the papers." The rising sun cast long, pale shadows across his apartment walls as Liam ended the call. He felt a surge of adrenaline, not from fear, but from a quiet, determined power. He had always been the quiet one, the overlooked one. But he was also the meticulous one, the one who paid attention, who remembered every slight, every injustice. And now he had the evidence. He had Aunt Beatrice. And he had the trust. The game had changed. By sunrise, Eleanor's lawyer, Mr. Davies, a respectable but somewhat weary family attorney who had handled their grandmother's estate, was on the phone. His tone was formal, professional, but with an underlying plea that bordered on desperation. "Mr. Miller," he began, his voice strained, "I understand there's been a misunderstanding regarding the trust. Your parents are extremely distressed. I must insist we meet in person to discuss this matter urgently." Liam allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to play on his lips. "A misunderstanding, Mr. Davies?" he asked, his voice calm, almost detached. "I assure you, there's no misunderstanding on my part." "Nevertheless," Mr. Davies pressed, "this situation is highly irregular. It could have serious legal ramifications. For everyone involved. I implore you, for the sake of your family, let's sit down and resolve this amicably." "I'm happy to meet Mr. Davies," Liam replied, his tone unwavering. "But I'll dictate the terms. Tomorrow morning. At the Daily Grind coffee shop on Elm Street. And you come alone. No parents. No sister. Just you and me." He was asserting control subtly but firmly. He needed neutral ground, a public place where he felt secure, where he could control the narrative. Mr. Davies hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to such defiance from a client's son. "Very well, Mr. Miller. Tomorrow it is." The lawyer's voice held a hint of resignation. He knew instinctively that this was not going to be an easy conversation. The next morning, the Daily Grind buzzed with the muted clatter of ceramic cups and the low murmur of morning conversations. Liam arrived early, choosing a corner table, his laptop open, a single unassuming flash drive connected to it. He looked like any other young professional starting his day, but beneath the calm exterior, his mind was a steel trap, every detail, every piece of evidence meticulously organized and ready. Mr. Davies arrived promptly, looking more harried than Liam remembered. He was a man who preferred the predictable world of wills and property deeds, not the messy, emotional landscape of family feuds. He sat down, placing his briefcase on the floor, and ordered a black coffee, his eyes already scanning Liam's face for any sign of weakness or remorse. "Mr. Miller," Mr. Davies began, his voice carefully measured, an attempt at professional gravitas. "Let's be frank. Your actions have caused considerable distress. Your parents are prepared to pursue legal action. This is a family matter, and I urge you to consider the consequences of your impulsiveness. There's still time to rectify this, to restore the trust, to put things right." He tried to appeal to Liam's sense of duty, to paint him as impulsive and destructive, a misguided youth who had made a grave error. Liam took a slow sip of his tea. "Impulsiveness, Mr. Davies?" he asked, his voice calm, almost disarmingly so. "I assure you my actions were anything but impulsive. They were the result of years of careful observation, and more recently meticulous investigation." He didn't directly address the trust transfer. Not yet. Instead, he reached for his laptop, turning the screen slightly towards Mr. Davies. Before we discuss the trust, Mr. Davies, I believe there are some other matters we need to address. Matters concerning my grandmother's estate and my parents' management of it. He opened a file, displaying a meticulously organized spreadsheet. This, Mr. Davies, is a timeline of financial transactions. And these, he said, clicking through to a series of scanned documents, are the supporting documents. The first document displayed on the screen was a bank statement from his grandmother's personal account, dated 5 years prior, showing a large unexplained transfer to an offshore account. An account Liam knew, linked to a shell corporation registered in his father's name. Mr. Davies leaned closer, his brow furrowing. His professional facade, already strained, began to crack. He recognized the bank, the account numbers. His eyes widened slightly as Liam clicked to the next document, an email exchange between Richard and Eleanor, discussing optimizing their grandmother's assets, using language that was vague enough to be plausible, but in context chillingly clear. It was a systematic siphoning off of significant funds from his grandmother's pre-trust assets, essentially defrauding her, while she was in her declining health and largely unaware. This, Mr. Davies, Liam continued, his voice steady, is evidence of embezzlement, fraud, elder abuse perhaps, all before the trust was even formally established. He then clicked to another set of documents. These were older versions of his grandmother's will, unsent, but heavily annotated. My grandmother was a meticulous woman, as you know. She kept everything. And Aunt Beatrice, Liam added, seeing the flicker of recognition in Mr. Davies's eyes at the mention of the name, was privy to many of these discussions. She provided me with copies of these earlier drafts, and her own notes. The draft showed clear attempts by Richard and Eleanor to alter the trust's terms, to give themselves more control, to limit Liam's access significantly, or even write him out entirely after his grandmother's death. This was the behind-his-back element directly linked to his dad's text. There were emails, too, between Richard and Eleanor, discussing how to manage Liam's expectations regarding the inheritance, and how to ensure Chloe received the lion's share, despite the grandmother's explicit wishes for equal distribution. There was even a brief, chilling exchange where Chloe, in a moment of unguarded greed, expressed her excitement about the new arrangement for the trust, implying her complicity or at least knowledge of her parents' schemes. Mr. Davies was visibly shaken. He pushed his coffee cup away, his face pale. The evidence was irrefutable. His initial professional composure had completely crumbled, replaced by a mixture of shock, dismay, and a grudging, almost fearful respect for Liam's meticulousness. He realized the depth of his client's deceit, and the precarious legal position they were now in. This wasn't just about a trust transfer. This was about years of calculated fraud. Liam had not only taken the trust, he had unearthed a mountain of incriminating evidence. The lawyer, a man who prided himself on his ethical standing, now saw his clients for what they truly were. Mr. Miller, Mr. Davies finally managed, his voice a strained whisper. This changes everything. Mr. Miller, Mr. Davies finally managed, his voice a strained whisper. This changes everything. He slumped back in his chair, the weight of the revelations pressing down on him. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. He knew the implications of what Liam had just shown him. This wasn't just a family dispute over an inheritance. This was a meticulously documented case of fraud and elder abuse, with his own clients at the center. Liam watched him, a silent, unblinking sentinel. Indeed, Mr. Davies, changes everything. My father's text, "You're not family anymore," wasn't a reaction to my trust transfer. It was a preemptive strike. They had discovered that I was aware of their activities. They were trying to disinherit me, to cut me off before I could expose them. My transfer of the trust was merely a reaction, perfectly timed, based on their initial aggression. I simply beat them to the punch. Mr. Davies ran a hand over his face. I need to speak with your parents immediately. Of course, Liam said, closing his laptop. But understand this, Mr. Davies. I have copies of everything. This flash drive is merely a backup. And Aunt Beatrice is prepared to provide a sworn affidavit confirming her knowledge of these events. She has her own set of documents going back years. This isn't a bluff. This is the truth. And it's going to come out. The confrontation that followed was not a single event, but a series of explosive phone calls and increasingly desperate meetings orchestrated by Mr. Davies. Richard and Eleanor, initially, were in a state of furious denial. "He's lying," Eleanor shrieked into the phone, her voice shrill and unhinged. "He's always been jealous of Chloe. He's trying to ruin us." Richard, usually the more composed of the two, bellowed threats, promising to sue Liam into destitution. But Mr. Davies, armed with Liam's irrefutable evidence, systematically dismantled their defenses. He laid out the bank statements, the emails, the annotated wills, the timeline of financial transactions that painted a damning picture. He explained the legal ramifications, the potential for not just civil suits but criminal charges for fraud and elder abuse. The word prison hung unspoken in the air, a chilling specter that finally began to penetrate their thick wall of self-deception. The karma began to hit, not with a sudden clap of thunder, but with the slow, agonizing drip of public humiliation. Chloe, unaware of the full extent of her parents' predicament, continued her online rants. Her social media posts escalated from vague accusations to direct, venomous attacks on Liam, painting him as a greedy, ungrateful monster who had stolen her inheritance. But as whispers of the real story began to circulate through their social circle, her narrative began to unravel. Friends, initially sympathetic, grew quiet, then distant. Comments on her posts turned from supportive to questioning, then to outright condemnation as snippets of the truth, carefully leaked by Aunt Beatrice and Liam's own quiet network, began to emerge. "Did you know your parents were siphoning off your grandmother's money?" One comment read. "Is that why Liam took the trust? To protect it?" Another. "Heard your mom and dad were trying to cut Liam out of the will. Is that true?" Chloe's carefully curated online persona, built on a foundation of inherited wealth and manufactured glamour, collapsed under the weight of public scrutiny. Her lavish lifestyle, once envied, was now seen as a product of ill-gotten gains. She was confronted by friends, by acquaintances, by the very people whose admiration she craved. Her public image, her most prized possession, lay shattered. She lashed out, defensively, hysterically, only digging herself deeper. Richard and Eleanor's fall was even more dramatic. Their carefully constructed facade of respectability, built over decades of social climbing and carefully managed appearances, crumbled spectacularly. The details of their financial improprieties, initially whispers, became open gossip at their country club, at charity events, at the exclusive social gatherings they once dominated. Board memberships were quietly rescinded. Invitations stopped arriving. Their attempts to deflect blame onto Liam, to paint him as a mentally unstable rogue, only backfired as the evidence against them was too strong, too meticulously documented. Mr. Davies, his reputation on the line, had no choice but to advise them to settle, to mitigate the damage, to avoid a full-blown criminal investigation that would expose every sordid detail. Liam, however, had no intention of letting them off easy. He agreed to a settlement, but on his terms. He didn't want their money, not the money they had stolen from his grandmother. He wanted justice, and he wanted to honor his grandmother's true wishes. He announced through Mr. Davies that a significant portion of the trust, the vast majority of it, would be donated to a newly established charity in his grandmother's name, the Eleanor Miller Legacy Foundation for Elder Care and Financial Literacy. This foundation would provide support for elderly individuals facing financial exploitation and offer educational resources to help families manage their finances ethically. It was a direct, powerful contrast to his parents' destructive actions, a beacon of light born from their darkness. A smaller portion of the trust, a carefully calculated sum, Liam kept for himself. It wasn't about greed, it was about compensation. Compensation for the years of emotional neglect, for the financial disadvantages he'd endured, for the constant feeling of being undervalued and dismissed. It was a symbolic reclaiming of what was rightfully his, not just financially but emotionally. He also made a surprising offer. A very small, carefully managed portion would be offered to Chloe, not as an act of generosity, but under strict conditions. It would be managed by a third party, released only for essential needs like housing or education, and contingent on her seeking therapy and demonstrating genuine efforts to rebuild her life ethically. It was a final subtle jab, highlighting her past entitlement and forcing her to confront her own dependence. Aunt Beatrice, true to her word, made a public statement, a carefully worded but damning account of her sister's declining health and Richard and Eleanor's manipulative behavior leading up to the establishment of the trust. Her quiet, dignified confirmation of Liam's claims solidified the public's perception, leaving no room for doubt about the family's long history of financial impropriety. Her statement, delivered with the librarian's precision, was the final nail in the coffin of Richard and Eleanor's reputation. The final blow for Liam was not a grand courtroom victory or a public declaration. It was a quiet, internal moment of liberation. He stood by his window, looking out at the city lights, his phone in his hand. He scrolled back to the initial text from his father, the words still burning. "You're not family anymore." He didn't delete it. He let it serve as a reminder. He thought of his grandmother, her kind eyes, her gentle wisdom. He had fulfilled her true wishes, not the manipulated versions of his parents. He had protected her legacy, and in doing so, he had found his own. He sent a final text message, not to his father but to himself, a silent vow that echoed his father's words, but with a profoundly different meaning. "You're right," he thought. "I'm not part of that family anymore." It wasn't a statement of abandonment, but a declaration of his hard-won freedom from their toxic influence, their endless demands, their emotional manipulation. It was his moment of ultimate control, a quiet triumph. He was finally free. The aftermath settled like dust after a storm. Liam experienced a profound sense of peace. The constant hum of anxiety that had accompanied him for years, the subtle pressure to conform, to seek approval, had vanished. He poured himself into his work, excelling in his career, finding satisfaction in problem-solving and innovation. He also began to explore passions he had long suppressed. Hiking, photography, even taking a pottery class, finding joy in creation rather than just calculation. He built genuine relationships, friendships based on mutual respect and shared interests, free from the shadow of family drama. He was no longer burdened by the need for his parents' approval, or the weight of their expectations. He had redefined what family meant to him, finding it not in blood, but in shared values and true connection. Richard and Eleanor faced the full weight of their actions. Their wealth was significantly diminished, not just by the legal settlements but by the public shaming that cost them business opportunities and social standing. Their once grand home felt hollow, filled with the echoes of their past ambitions and the silence of their fractured relationships. Their family unit was irrevocably broken, a casualty of their own greed and deceit. They were left with each other, and the bitter taste of their own consequences. Chloe struggled to rebuild her life. Without the endless financial crutch she had always relied on, she was forced to confront the realities of earning a living and managing her own affairs. The small portion of the trust, managed by the third party, provided a safety net, but it was a stark contrast to the lavish lifestyle she had been accustomed to. She attended therapy, initially resentfully, but slowly, painfully, began to peel back the layers of entitlement and self-deception. Her journey was long and uncertain, a difficult path towards self-sufficiency and genuine self-worth. The Eleanor Miller Legacy Foundation for Elder Care and Financial Literacy thrived. Liam served on its board, ensuring its mission remained true to his grandmother's spirit. It became a powerful symbol of hope and justice, a positive, lasting legacy that contrasted sharply with the family's destructive actions. His grandmother's name, once associated with a bitter inheritance dispute, was now synonymous with compassion and integrity. Liam often visited his grandmother's grave, a quiet place overlooking a serene lake. He would sit there, not with sadness, but with a quiet sense of gratitude. He had fought for her, and in doing so, he had fought for himself. He had found his own definition of family, a chosen family of friends and mentors who saw him, truly saw him for who he was. He had found peace. When faced with betrayal, how do you redefine what family truly means to you?